Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for participating in today's OA Alliance webinar, which will focus on the nationally determined contributions that parties to the Paris Climate Accord have agreed to submit as part of their commitment as signatories to that agreement. The webinar will focus on how oceans can be incorporated to address both mitigation and adaptation potential. My name is Jessie Turner, and I'm the project manager of the OA Alliance, and will be moderating today's webinar. A couple things to note before we get started: please do mute your lines if you have your computer audio or phone on to make sure we limit feedback. Okay. So we will go ahead and begin the webinar today with an overview of the OA Alliance mission and core outcomes, as we do at the beginning of every webinar. Launched in 2016 by the 4 West Coast jurisdictions of Washington, California, Oregon, and the province of British Columbia, the OA Alliance brings together a diversity of governments and non-government actors across the globe to highlight ocean acidification as an imminent threat to coastal economies and ocean ecosystems within their region. The OA Alliance calls for the creation of OA action plans by member governments and interested affiliate partners that will advance scientific understanding, reduce causes of acidification, protect the environment and coastal communities from impacts of a changing ocean, expand public awareness, and sustain international support for addressing this global problem. Since its launch, the OA Alliance has grown to just over 70 members, including 31 government members and 42 affiliate members, and we are still growing. Core outcomes of the Alliance include the advancement of OA action plans, elevating OA and international climate agreements and relevant frameworks, and building a diverse coalition of governments and non-governments calling for actions. Priorities in 2018 are centered around advancing the creation of OA action plans, as the OA Alliance made a commitment at the UN SDG 14 Oceans Conference to support the development of 15 OA action plans by June of 2019, and we thank you for your work to help us achieve this goal. So the OA Alliance has an OA action plan toolkit that's available on our website, and we are in the process of further developing supportive materials for members to access this year, including the document, including a document aimed at supporting national governments who are interested in incorporating ocean acidification and other aspects of ocean health into their NDCs. We are very happy to report that New Zealand, California, and Oregon have begun to initiate the development of OA action plans, and many other members have started along this process. We are keeping in mind that not all OA action plans will have the same framework or structure. For example, some governments may choose to write a standalone OA action plan. Other national partners may integrate OA or other climate ocean impacts to existing frameworks like NDCs. Governments may decide to address ocean mitigation and adaptation into existing climate action plans or ocean action plans, or decide to integrate actions across ecosystem management tools. As an alliance, we hope to showcase a mix of options and unique ways that members are approaching their commitments to taking actions on OA. I also want to quickly note that we are inviting and encouraging affiliate members, our non-government members, to create OA action plans that best align and support their existing missions and describe how they can use their capacity to support and encourage actions that mitigate, adapt, and build resiliency to OA. Our affiliate members serve a critical role in helping with the education, outreach, data gathering, and information sharing that's needed to accomplish our core outcomes. So as mentioned, today's webinar is really an opportunity to provide a bit more in-depth information and resources regarding the specific tool of NDCs in addressing climate-related ocean changes and further embedding ocean climate impacts into the UNFCCC framework. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our presenters this morning. We have a great lineup from Scripps Institution of Oceanography, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and the VARTA Group, who serves as the secretariat to the Because the Ocean Declaration, which is calling on national governments to incorporate ocean into their NDCs, and has done an incredible job hosting workshops and meetings on this topic at major climate gatherings, including the COPs. Speakers, please remember to unmute yourself when speaking, and unfortunately you'll need to say next slide when you are ready to advance, and I will advance the next slide for you. All right, Natalia, I think you are up next.
My name is Natalia Gallo. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this webinar. I'm a recent PhD graduate from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I had an interdisciplinary chapter of my thesis where I focused on looking at how countries are including ocean commitments and their climate pledges under the Paris Agreement. Otherwise, my PhD is very much in biological oceanography and ecology, but I became really interested in how the ocean science that we were producing was actually being incorporated or not incorporated in these international climate negotiations. And through the program for the Center for Marine Biodiversity and Conservation, and through collaboration with David Victor at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at UCSD, I was able to learn more about the international climate negotiation process and attend several COPs and then work on this analysis. So, okay, I see the slides, great. So I guess I'll start. Yeah. Okay. This focuses on a project that I worked on a few years ago now. So this study came out in 2016, and I'm happy to share it with anybody. If you get paywalled, just send me an email. Actually, I think it's open access, so nobody should be getting paywalled. Next slide. Great. So as an ocean scientist, I became really interested in how ocean issues are being represented within the climate negotiations. And so I was able to see the development of the Paris Agreement by going to several COPs leading up to the Paris COP. And I started to understand the framework for the Paris Agreement, which was really these nationally determined contributions, these climate pledges that countries had to make. And these are a really powerful tool because prior to the Paris Agreement, there was no feature where everyone had to provide a similar document that really listed their priorities as relates to mitigation action. And with the Paris Agreement, there was also now an additional focus on adaptation action as well. So these NDCs provided this really tremendous data source for us as scientists to look through and understand how countries were recognizing what their climate priorities were in terms of the action that they were planning for. And the NDC is another really interesting feature because countries are required to provide their NDCs under the Paris Agreement and then continuously revise them. So every 5 years, there needs to be a new revision provided by countries that have adopted and ratified the Paris Agreement. And so we analyzed 161 NDCs that were available at that time to look at, next slide, first, how many NDCs included any types of ocean topics. Second, how are marine issues actually included in the NDCs? And then third, what national variables influence how marine focused an NDC is? So next slide. So the first finding, and one that was actually quite surprising to me, is that most countries actually do include some type of a marine focus within their NDC. So we found that 70% of the NDCs that we reviewed had some type of ocean focus. However, the level of specificity varied dramatically across NDCs. So next slide. And then we looked at how frequently ocean issues were being incorporated as either sectors of the mitigation component. So within the framework of an NDC, and if the first focus of it is to really prioritize and list the mitigation goals of the country, and that is the action that the country is going to take to actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then a secondary component, and a component that we see addressed a lot more by developing countries, is adaptation, which is how countries are planning to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And so we found that marine issues were much more frequently incorporated within the adaptation sector than they were incorporated within the mitigation sector. And when we did see marine issues incorporated within the mitigation sector, there were frequently kind of co-benefits. So a mitigation action that also had positive impacts on adaptation. So for example, planting mangroves, which would both sequester carbon and also protect shorelines. So marine issues are most frequently included in the adaptation sectors or as components of impacts and risk. So next slide. We also looked kind of across the board at different types of marine topics that were included by countries. And so we saw that predominantly the marine or ocean focus kind of really came up with relation to ocean warming. So a lot of countries listed concerns relating to ocean warming, for example, sea level rise or rising temperatures, whereas topics like ocean acidification, which is the focus of this alliance, and also ocean deoxygenation, which was the focus of my PhD, still remain a lot more poorly incorporated and considered within these climate plans. And so just last night, I went through and looked at the different NDCs for countries that included ocean acidification just to get an idea. So I think 14 countries included OA in their NDC, and just to see how specific these different contributions were. And usually they were very, very general. So for example, simply listing ocean acidification as one impact that countries were concerned about for future adaptation needs. Frequently also ocean acidification was addressed as an impact they were concerned about, specifically relating to their fisheries sector and their food security. And it seems a lot of countries are interested in kind of more exploration of those issues, but certainly the potential impacts are for more than just 14 countries. So we hope to see more countries incorporating this within their climate plans in the future. And of the 14 countries that included OA, Kiribati definitely had kind of the most extensive incorporation of OA in their NDC. Next slide. So we looked across a whole assortment of different types of categories. So we developed these categories that countries could be incorporating ocean issues into. And here you can see the number of NDCs that use these types of categories within their NDC. And so predominantly it's coastline impacts the countries are most concerned about and are listing within their NDC. So that's a marine impact, but it has a more direct impact on the terrestrial sector and kind of on that economic sector. A lot of countries brought up fisheries impacts, which is pretty interesting because, as I'll talk about in the next component of this analysis, we actually didn't see any correlation between the value of fisheries and how much focus they actually gave to marine issues within their NDCs. So it's interesting that fisheries impacts are frequently being incorporated and brought up in NDCs, but we're not seeing any statistical correlation there. So the last component of the analysis was to understand how different national variables, next slide. Yeah, thank you. How different national variables influenced or didn't influence the amount of marine focus that we saw across this assortment of 161 NDCs. So we developed this variable called the marine focus factor, which is a quantitative representation of the frequency and diversity of marine topics as they were included in NDCs. So again, this was a variable that was incorporated just the amount of marine words or keywords that you would find in the NDC, and also related to the diversity of marine topics that were incorporated within the NDC. So next slide. So the first thing we see is that there's a really large variance in the marine focus across NDCs. So here, all of the countries that you see in blue are countries that included some sort of a marine component within their NDC. And again, the small island developing states, which very frequently included marine components, you can't see on the map because they're too small. So this map makes it look like a lot fewer countries incorporated ocean issues, where actually there were, it was about 70%. But the marine focus factor ranged between countries that didn't include ocean issues at all to countries that had quite a high marine focus factor of 24. Next slide. We found overall that coastal countries, as we would expect, had much higher marine focus factors than landlocked countries. And then we found that the highly developed countries really predominantly underrepresented the oceans, even though a lot of these countries have large exclusive economic zones, important fisheries, and so here we see those Annex 1 countries having a very low marine focus factor, and many Annex 1 countries didn't include the oceans at all, potentially because they focused a lot more on mitigation, and I think that there's more room to explore marine mitigation options. In contrast, the small island developing states had a much higher marine focus factor in their NDCs. Next slide. So then we developed a model to look at how different national variables affected how high the marine focus factor for each country's NDC is. And so here on the left, you can see the different national variables that we looked at. So for example, the percent of the population living in areas less than 5 meters above the sea level, whether the country was a small island developing state or not, the percent of the land area that was less than 5 meters above sea level, the actual coastline length, the gross domestic product, the amount of fisheries catch, the total EEZ area, the percent marine protected area within that country's EEZ, whether that country was an Annex 1 country or not, a highly developed country, and then the ratio of the exclusive economic zone to land area. And so we hypothesized that a number of these variables would positively affect the marine focus factor. So for example, if you have an outstanding kind of conservation focus in the country in a high marine protected area, you would also see a higher marine focus factor in those countries' NDCs. And we expected that if that country is profiting significantly from fisheries and had a high fisheries catch, we would see a positive effect on that country's NDC. And actually, a lot of these factors that we were expecting to be positively correlated to the marine focus factor weren't. So our final model was able to explain 38% of the variance in the marine focus of NDCs. The only scientific variable that was positively correlated and significantly positively correlated was the percent of the population living in low-lying areas. So vulnerabilities of sea level rise are really driving the amount of marine focus in NDCs right now. Fisheries catch, however, is completely not, which is really interesting because countries are listing fisheries impacts as a major concern. And it makes me wonder how much engagement of the fisheries sector there actually is in the development of these NDCs, because you would think that fisheries are really important and stand to be impacted significantly by climate change and marine impacts, then you would see that increase the marine focus factor of that NDC, and it doesn't. And then politically, there's also a really strong effect. So countries that were SID, small island developing states, had a significant positive impact on the marine focus factor. And if the country was a highly developed country in Annex 1, it had a negative effect. So also interestingly, we expected that the larger your EEZ to land area is, the more focused you would be on ocean issues in your NDC, and we actually didn't see that relationship at all. So we actually saw a significant negative correlation there. So the larger your EEZ to land area became, the less likely you were to focus on marine issues in your NDC. This is interesting and a little confusing. So just a few of the takeaway points. So I think the good news is that most countries are focusing on marine issues within their NDCs, but there's a lot of room for improvement, which is great because every 5 years these NDCs are getting revised. We see a greater focus on ocean adaptation than ocean mitigation, and currently we're seeing a real disconnect between the scientific potential drivers that should be influencing marine focus, but really we're seeing right now kind of a stronger political influence. And the main exception to this is the sea level rise vulnerability. So many improvements are still needed. Again, most of the Annex 1 countries, which are the largest emitters, are not including oceans in their NDCs. And there are large gaps remain in recognition of certain marine impacts. So ocean deoxygenation and acidification, for example. And there's a large spread in how specific marine contributions are. So I'm really excited about the work this group is doing to try and actually help develop these ocean action plans. Next slide. So here's just the paper, Ocean Commitments Under the Paris Agreement, which you can find in Nature Climate Change. And then there was this nice short write-up on uncovering ocean-related priorities, which reviews some of the key findings. And if you go to the next slide, There's also an extensive supplementary section to this paper. So if you want to get into the data and kind of look at how every country has categorized different topics, you can go and do that within this extensive supplementary section. And then last slide. And I think that for me, one of the open questions is, it seemed to me from reading all of these NDCs that the stakeholders that were involved in the development of the NDC really affected what kind of NDC we were looking at. And so thinking about how the scientific community and then also the fisheries sectors and other groups can be better incorporated as stakeholders within the NDC process, I think that would, and certainly groups like this, I think can help make sure that these ocean topics are better represented in the next round of NDCs. So with that, my last slide is just a thank you for your attention, and I just wanted to acknowledge the Center for Marine Biodiversity and Conservation, the many Scripps donors who send us to COPs, and then other funding sources that made this work possible. And thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Amazing overview, and it's always great to hear your thoughtful analysis. Any questions? Great. Well, thank you so much, Natalia and Remy, for the conversation. So next up, getting a little bit of the groundwork of the NDC. What is the NDC and how has ocean been represented since 2015? I want to now call the next speaker, Dorothy Herr from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, who was part of an inventory of NDCs specifically looking at blue carbon mitigation projects. And I wanted for Dorothy, thank you so much. I know you're staying up late to join us here today. And so wanted to give you the opportunity to hear a little bit more about what that blue carbon inventory looked like, how it was commissioned, the role of blue carbon projects and NDCs, both for mitigation and adaptation potential, and of course, other main takeaways from that process. So Dorothy, again, bear with me here. I think all right, and I'm going to screen share. Let's see. I think I can do this.
Great. Well, in the meantime, thanks also from my side for the invitation, and myself being involved in the COP since 2009, so the famous COP15 in Copenhagen. It's fantastic to see how far we've come and all the various groups and country, sub-regional gatherings looking at the various topics concerning oceans. It's really amazing to see that progress happening in the nearly last 10 years. Maybe also just as a quick reflection on the work and presentation that Natalia just did, I think the 70%, I think we should keep that in mind, not in a way that it's we're almost there. I think it gives an indication of what countries have done in their NDCs, and one has to say that many of these INDCs have been done by consultants at the time, and there weren't a lot of broad stakeholder consultation process involved because no one really knew at the time what was going to happen with it, how they're going to look like. So certainly also for the scientists, I do see a much bigger role to play in the years to come as this whole process is shaping up, as the guidelines are being revised, etc. But I think from, and I'll come back to that in a second on the slide, is that we have to be careful in the, as Natalia hinted as well, if one country lists ocean acidification or ocean warming as an impact in its NDCs, it doesn't mean that it's actually, considering ocean issues as a broader topic in its NDCs, whether it is in mitigation options or adaptation. So we just need to keep that in mind, that there is really a lot of progress that needs to be done on this topic. I don't know, I still see my slides a bit crooked. Are you working on that, Jessie?
I have what I was able to produce, but does it feel...
Okay, that's fine. Well, then maybe if you can go to slide 2.
Yes, I have what I have. How's that?
Okay, no, it's fine. Sorry, I should have probably sent it as PowerPoint and not PDF, so my fault. Yeah, so basically reiterating what Natalia said, that NDCs embody the efforts of each country to reduce national emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. So it's both the mitigation and adaptation component. There are ongoing negotiations to actually define some of these implementing guidelines for the Paris Agreement, the so-called Paris Rulebook. So there are still open questions around the accounting of NDCs, the so-called transparency framework, or how the cooperative approaches under Article 6 will work out. So there's still a lot of guidance to come in, actually, well, supposedly at the end of this year, but certainly also into 2019, that will hopefully guide also the ocean community of what it means to put the various elements of ocean into the NDCs. Also in parallel, myself and colleagues and also others, after this first round of reviews that we had in 2016, a lot of stakeholders are sitting down and taking a much deeper look into what it means to organize the NDCs. So not just in a specific topic, but certainly, in the broader framework, also to increase clarity and transparency. So there you can certainly expect quite a few pieces of work coming out at the next COP. This is all super simplified, but basically how you can expect from what we see currently in the NDCs is sort of big categories, sort of a lot of countries in the first section talking about their vulnerability and the sort of climate change impacts, both on society and ecosystems. Then there is a big section on the various mitigation actions, as well as sort of the adaptation actions. So that's just to give you a bit of a picture of how most of these NDCs look like. Next slide. And to what Jesse alluded upon, so myself with a group of people working a lot on coastal blue carbon, so basically looking at the role of mangrove seagrasses and salt marshes primarily in their role for climate change mitigation. I believe I don't have to explain that largely here, but it's the same idea that we know from terrestrial forests, sort of the ongoing sequestration of carbon into the roots and biomass, and specifically the soil beneath those systems that can trap and store the carbon, as well as if those systems are destroyed or lost, that the carbon is going back into the atmosphere and ocean. And the idea is to see how we can use this mitigation service also as an incentive to protect and restore them using climate or carbon finance. So we basically did a similar exercise that Natalia did, but just looking much more focused on blue carbon. And we also included the adaptation component to coastal ecosystem or coastal ecosystem management. Similarly, so not surprising in that sense, we also found that a lot of countries included the coastal elements or these nature-based solutions from coastal ecosystem in their adaptation strategies. Some were more specific on ecosystem-based adaptation, whereas others talked more broadly about integrated coastal zone management efforts, for example, for adaptation. And only a few countries talked explicitly about these coastal wetlands in terms of mitigation. You see the numbers there on the slide, and also the report is available online. Next slide, please. But also this effort was really just a scratching on the surface. And as I mentioned, there is a study forthcoming with colleagues from the University of Oxford that broadly looks at not just the coastal nature-based solution, but broadly all nature-based solution across ecosystems, across the studies that have been done. So Natalia's yours will be included in that as well. And there is some sort of general trends that we can already observe. And I listed some of them here. For example, that there is a high degree of mismatch between sort of overall visions and actions in these NDCs, but then also, mismatch between the vision and the action, and then also between the action and robust targets. So there aren't often a lot of targets that one can hold countries accountable for, or to analyze how far the progress has come or tries to achieve. Then there's also, in terms of nature-based solutions broadly, there is a high level of commitments to nature-based solutions, mitigation and or adaptation. But again, often there is a lack that it doesn't really translate into evidence-based actions. There is a lot of inconsistency in terms of the level of action. So some NDCs talk very specifically, I want to do a seagrass restoration project in location Y, versus other countries talk very more on a programmatic or policy level. And then also if you just look at an NDC, for example, we know Australia is working quite a lot on blue carbon, but if you just look at their NDCs, it doesn't come across. So there is still this absolute mismatch of the NDCs in that one document and what a country is actually doing in various levels. So please stay tuned for forthcoming effort and release of those analysis at the COP in Katowice now in December. Next slide, please. Again, sort of trying to get to the question of how to incorporate ocean in NDCs, or as Natalia mentioned, in the revision process of NDCs. Again, this is a very simplified version of the framework that is forthcoming, where again, I think one can visualize the NDCs that there is a section on impacts and vulnerabilities, and then sort of being further drilled down into the mitigation and adaptation components, where most of the time a target for mitigation would be preferable, and then sort of the broader vision about what adaptation actions can be done. And then again, here very simplified, obviously there's a lot in between there, but then of course in terms of actions, there can be the nature-based solutions part, as well as the more technology engineering type efforts. And I think as we move forward also into the next review cycle of the new NDCs, I think, for example, that we need to be much clearer in depicting, when we say countries include oceans, well, again, do they talk about that in terms of their impact and vulnerability, or are they talking about ocean in terms of mitigation actions or adaptation actions using, whether it's nature or technologically based ocean solutions? So I think there we can refine and need to refine the analysis much more to have much clearer pictures of which, is it actually just a statement of a vulnerability, or is it an adaptation action using ocean solution. Next slide, please. And here's sort of just looking ahead a little bit, just sort of some initial ideas, where of course when we say, well, how can we include OA into NDCs? Certainly it would be fantastic if in the next review cycle countries would state their impacts from OA and the vulnerabilities to OA in their specific national setting. Then on the mitigation side, of course, that's sort of key, and that's sometimes a bit, again, hard to read in these shorter documents, to see how does the target really address some of these impacts from ocean acidification and try to reduce the impact. So how can countries increase their mitigation aims to actually help to reduce ocean acidification? And then on the adaptation side, it's also including much more strategies and visions of how to adapt to ocean acidification, which I think hasn't been very much, if at all, included in the current NDCs that exist. And then again, on the action side, of course, having a very clear, any emission reduction effort in the transport sector, in the building sector, you name it, will obviously help reduce the impacts of ocean acidification, whether there are specific, technological advancements in helping to reduce OA locally. Some of you might be absolutely better placed to say that than me, but certainly I think it would also be useful for countries to include much more information on how nature-based solutions can actually help to mitigate, or in this case, help adapt to some of the ocean acidification efforts. So for example, the blue carbon aspect, etc. I think I'll leave it at that, and happy to take any questions. I kept it a bit shorter given also the time.
Well, that's great, Dorothy. Thank you so much for the focus on the OA piece here specifically is really interesting and obviously very applicable to what we are trying to engage our government members in, both at a national level but also subnational level from different vehicles than NDCs. Any questions for Dorothy while I figure out our screen switching here?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Sarah Cooley from Ocean Conservancy. Can you hear me?
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Dorothy. Thanks for a really interesting presentation. My question is, how much are you focusing on sort of ocean issues in general in your NDC analysis work that you're doing? I'm really interested in reading it when it comes out, and I'm curious about sort of the focus that you're taking. Are you zeroing in more on like blue carbon and things like that? Are you looking at all of the ocean issues kind of broadly mentioned, the stuff that Natalia's presentation set up?
Yeah, in the work we're doing, thanks for the question, with IUCN, yeah, the focus is on nature-based solutions. So we're both looking at, let's say, any coastal ecosystem for their mitigation and or adaptation efforts. So in this forthcoming study with Oxford, it's nature-based solutions only. But I think if you want to obviously address the broader ocean and climate nexus, there are other ocean solutions, renewable energy from ocean or reduced emissions from shipping, you name it, that can feature under this broader ocean solutions banner. So it would be terrific if there were other efforts out there that could complement them.
I've been applying the can't forget the name of it. Sirline, thank you. Daily, twice a day. I've had to stop using the wash because it was really, it worked effectively for a short while and nothing else was coming out, but it really was bothering his ears. And then, but I just want to say, when we put the call on this morning, he's still.
There you go. I don't want to mute a question, but I'm not sure that was a question.
Okay, yeah, I was a bit confused now. Okay. Sarah, did I answer your question?
You did, thank you. My one follow-up question is then, you said it's forthcoming around the next COP. So should we look for it then?
Yes, so I'm happy to share it. There is, you will be seeing a much more sophisticated framework, and it talks also about some of the issues that Natalia said about how do you include science-based information, et cetera, et cetera. So the framework is much, much bigger and more complex, but for this purpose, I drilled it down quite a bit.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Dorothy. This is Lisa Swartoni. Can you hear
Hi,
me?
Lisa. Famous voices.
How are you? Thank you so much. Really good to hear this overview and see this framework. I had a question about whether or not the NDCs will continue to include adaptation measures. I've heard that while some countries threw in adaptation measures this round, that that might change and the adaptation may end up being in communications, and NDCs really focused on mitigation. So I'm wondering if you've heard that and how that might affect how we pursue these, the kind of ocean climate actions in our policy work.
Yeah, I think that is sort of an ongoing debate, and hopefully we'll have more clarity about that in Katowice. But I think, yeah, in general, we focus now on the NDCs, and certainly I think in terms of sort of the conservation actions we want to do in terms of ecosystem management, I think we need to keep a close eye on, for example, what's going to happen with Article 6 and either the market or non-market based approaches, and how can that be seen or be used to push further on inventories or better mapping for coastal ecosystems. But obviously there is a bunch of other sort of reporting tools and needs beside that I think many of us have overlooked a little bit. So I think it's even if adaptation would drop out of the NDCs, you know, there are other tools out there in terms of reporting that we as, yeah, let's say the advocates for the ocean need to keep a much closer eye on what countries are doing with those.
Thank you, Lisa and Dorothy, and Remy. I'm sure that you have some. I'd love to hear your thoughts and perspective on that question through your next presentation. So with that, we will. Remy, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I hear you fine.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and get your slides up here, and again, bear with me. We'll get it going. Okay, share slideshow from the start. How's that look for you?
It looks good for me on my screen. I will have to tell you to move when necessary to move to the next slide.
That is correct.
Do you want me to start? Do you want me to start?
Please do.
So thank you for the invitation. Hello, everybody. Good evening for those in the same part of the world where I am, and good morning to the others. I hope you don't mind the French accent. I hope you like the French accent, because you'll have quite a bit of that during that presentation. As I think has been mentioned, and I am in charge of coordinating the ad hoc secretariat of the Because the Ocean initiative. And if we move to the next slide, maybe I can quickly explain to those who are not entirely familiar what it is. The Because the Ocean initiative was launched in Paris on the eve of COP21, and it's composed now of approximately 35 countries. I say approximately, that doesn't look very correct, but I think it's 35. It might be 36. I mean, it's always a moving target. So I say approximately, just in case somebody starts counting and say, you forgot me. So, but roughly 35 countries have signed up to either, well, many have signed both declarations, the one that was launched at COP21, and then the one at COP22, and there was many more signing the second declaration of COP22. So that's why we've got that count. So the first Because the Ocean Declaration, which, as I said, was launched on the eve of COP21, was one of the initiatives that sought to emphasize the link between ocean and climate. Like, you know, as I always say in a very simplified nutshell, if you want to protect the climate, you need to protect the ocean, and if you want to protect the ocean, you need to protect the climate. And of course, it was on the eve of COP21, so there was no Paris Agreement. I mean, it was in the making, and there was no certainty that there would be a Paris Agreement at the end of the 2 weeks. So the declaration focused on three elements, had three acts, if you want. One was supporting the proposed UN Ocean Conference, which had been proposed at the time to the UNGA by Fiji and Sweden, but there had been no resolution to that effect. So there was a call to the UNGA to go ahead and accept the proposal by Fiji and Sweden to hold a UN Ocean Conference, which, as we all know, happened later, and the conference, the first conference, took place in June 2013. 17. The other proposal was, or the other call was to the IPCC to agree to the proposal that had been tabled by Monaco and supported by a number of countries to prepare a special report on the ocean, which in the end became a decision to prepare a report on the ocean and the cryosphere. And as you know, this is work which is now ongoing. In February 2016, it was agreed to start that work, and the report will be launched. The special report will be launched next year in September 2019. And the third element was this thing that we called, it was actually proposed by Chile originally, that the UNFCCC should maybe have an ocean plan, or something on ocean. Of course, as I said, it was before the Paris Agreement, so basically that's what was thrown at the time, and that was further developed a year later in the second because the Ocean Declaration that was signed by many countries, and which had a specific focus on what we call ocean NDCs, and the words that reference the ocean NDCs are that UNFCCC parties should consider submitting NDCs that promote, as appropriate, ambitious climate action in order to minimize the adverse effects of climate change in the ocean and contribute to its protection and conservation. And so after this second declaration, we started to work on this. I should mention that when I say we, the key partners because the Ocean Declaration, servicing and working with the 35 countries that are members. The key partners are the Ministry of External Relations of Chile, the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, TARA, the TARA Foundation from France, IDRI, also headquartered in France. The Climate and Ocean Platform works also very closely with us, also headquartered in Paris, and recently the Ocean Conservancy, which is represented at this webinar. Recently, the Ocean Conservancy also joined as partners and have become active. There are also conversations with WRI, and we work also, I should mention it, closely with the Secretariat of the Pacific Community, and of course Fiji, the Ocean Pathway, and so forth. And as I said, from the BARDA group, we're servicing the initiative. Maybe we can move to the next slide. And so it was because the ocean, so basically NDCs, I call it how the ocean, because how, right? And we started quite early in the game to try to engage with stakeholders and governments about how we can incorporate the ocean into the work of the UNFCCC in Washington, D.C. Also on the eve of the third Ocean Conference in September 2016. We had a workshop. Probably some of you were took part of it, and many others. We had at that time it was the Moroccan presidency, so we had Akima, the minister there, and we had Laurence Tubiana, of course, and representatives from Chile and others, and we organized that jointly. It was jointly sponsored by the Ministry of External Relations of Chile and with the National Geographic Society, which is headquartered in Washington, D.C. The report is available. There is an IIED report, and that was really, a first discussion about, after the adoption of the Paris Agreement, nearly a year after, on what we call ocean NDCs. Then a year later in Bonn, we had a workshop also on the eve of the COP 23, and many of you were present. So you will remember that there was three key issues that were addressed: integrating the ocean in NDCs will require a dedicated and systemic effort. That was one conclusion. Ocean-minded NDCs should help climate policies and ocean conservation to mutually reinforce each other. And there was a lot of talk about the silos business in particular, and reinforcing the knowledge base needed to take into account the ocean in climate action. These were the three consensus, and if we move to the next slide now, you will remember that there were three key messages from that workshop, and the report is available. So I'm not going to start reading that stuff, but those of you who have not had a chance to see this document, which is online, but if you have a problem finding it, you should send me an email or a WhatsApp, and I'll be very happy to send you this report, which contains these three key messages that you have in front of you, and which we later during the COP 23 presented during a so-called high-level dinner in the second week of the COP. And so if we move to the next slide, we will see that based on these consultations, we started a series of regional workshops with the countries members or signatory to the Because the Ocean Declarations. We started early this year in March in Concepcion, Chile. We had we did not start with a regional workshop. We started with a national workshop with Chilean experts, and in order to address as part of the preparations of Chile for their next NDCs, we worked with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of the Environment and I think Fisheries also of Chile, and at a workshop hosted by the University of Concepcion, south of Santiago de Chile. And that was a sort of rehearsal for then a regional workshop that gathered just this month on the 2nd and 3rd of October, so nearly a month ago, gathered nearly all the Latin American countries that are member of the Because the Ocean initiative in order to start preparing a track for the integration of ocean elements or ocean-minded elements into their revised NDCs. The report of this workshop, I mean, we have a preliminary report which is in Spanish, but it's been distributed to all the participants, and they all have until tomorrow, the 25th of October, to not only send their comments, but there are a number of templates and elements of information that they all need to add. So I expect that next week or in a week or two, we'll have the final document ready, and then we'll prepare it in English as well. In the meantime, if there are people who are interested in the copy in Spanish, once it will be finalized, I'll be happy to submit it. And along that same vein, we're preparing 2 other regional workshops, one in Suva, Fiji, in February of the coming year. We're in conversations with Fiji and with the Ocean Pathway, and we pretty much agreed that February. We don't have the exact date yet, and that will gather the South Pacific countries around the same vein to prepare that work. And the same at the European level. It will be in Spain. I don't know yet which city, but it will be in Spain after the Pacific workshop, March or April. In any case, it has to be before the European election, and then the idea is that all this work is put together on time for when the IPCC special report is launched in Monaco on the 20th, 23rd of September of the coming year. We expect that it will be an opportunity for ministers of countries that have participated in this process to say, hey, in anticipation for that of that special report, we've started doing our homework, or some may say we have completed our homework, and here is what we're planning to put forward at COP25 and you know, as part of the revised NDCs. As you see at the bottom of that slide, we're planning on reporting at COP24. I think it's still tentative, but you'll be all welcome and invited, of course, if you want. But on the eve of the so-called Ocean Day, which is actually Ocean 3 hours this year, I understand. So on the eve of that day, which is the 8th, so on the 7th, we will report on the progress done and the plans under the Because the Ocean initiative. So you'll be welcome to come. And can we move to? I think it's almost the last slide. Maybe we can. Yeah. Just to mention that at the Santiago workshop, you must wonder what we focused on. Well, there was a session on the role of the ocean as a carbon sink, and with presentation and contributions from the Chilean CRDOS, the Center for Climate and Resilience Research, headquartered at the University of Concepcion. We discussed synergies between NPAs, marine protected areas, and climate action, both as a mitigation and adaptation tool, and together with the Ocean Conservancy, I helped prepare a presentation and a discussion with the countries, which we had at the workshop on that important topic of NPAs and their role in climate action. There was a discussion on the process for inclusion. I see a typo, I wrote it in Spanish. Inclusion of the ocean within the UNFCCC. And there was also, we benefited from the presence of Manuel Barange, who runs the Fisheries Department of FAO. There was a discussion on the findings of their recent report, the FAO report on the effects of climate change on fisheries and aquaculture. I think it's a nice summary of the main topics that were discussed. Next slide, please. And we're going to continue because as Inya Serwiratu, the high-level climate champion from Fiji, from the Fiji presidency, said at the workshop in Bonn, it should now be clearly recognized that the climate action needed to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement will never be enough if the ocean is not part of that action. And I trust that we all agree and that we can all work together, next slide, to this effect. Next slide. And so in order to make sure we continue to work together, I can only say stay in touch. You know how to reach me, and also many of my colleagues working on that project as well. And I'm glad to announce that very soon, before COP24, there will be a website, because the ocean.org. We're working on it at the moment. We're going, now that we've really gone into the nitty-gritty, we're going to have this website as basically as a place where documents and are available, and we track down the process, the history, and we will also draw attention to the work of other organizations working in the same direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Remy, and thanks for everyone for staying over a little bit longer, but definitely well worth it. Any questions for Remy before I give you some final thoughts and remarks? Okay, great. Well, if you bear with me here, I just want to again absolutely thank who are calling in from all over, as mentioned earlier, and appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with us. As far as next steps and opportunities for collaboration and staying engaged on this issue, both of incorporating ocean into NDCs specifically, but also, of course, across the climate conversations more broadly, I just want to flag that, again, looking for the IUCN and Oxford report that Dorothy mentioned coming out soon is a great resource. We should be following up on the COP24 convening opportunities that Remy mentioned, and in the future, because the ocean workshops. So if you're a national government looking to get engaged in those workshops, or just learn more about the resources related to the workshops, please get in touch and stay aware of those. I also want to note that we are working, the OA Alliance, in partnership with the Ocean Conservancy, are working on a document that will be available on our website that specifically addresses incorporating OA into NDCs and pulls from a lot of these resources that you heard from today. And I'll note that Natalia, during Natalia's presentation, she mentioned that 14 of the NDCs currently submitted include references to ocean acidification. And we have gone through those specific NDCs to pull out some of the highlights and themes and turned that into some recommendations. So within that document, the draft that you saw earlier that will come out soon, there's a series of recommendations that speak a lot to some of the comments made today, incorporating OA impacts into existing targets, assessing threats and key resources, so really thinking about that vulnerability assessment, establishing baseline measurements, clearly critical, building adaptive capacity, making sure that that is part of NDCs as applicable going forward, and then of course including funding goals. So that should be, again, still being in draft form, but will be available on our website shortly. And then the last thing I'll quickly note while I have you captive is we will be having probably two more webinars before the end of the year is over, the next one occurring in about 2 weeks on November 5th. that will be related to establishing and maintaining regional monitoring networks. We'll hear a little bit from the Integrated Ocean Observing System networks that were started here in the United States and funded by NOAA, and learn a little bit about their build out and their evolution over time. We are continuing to advance progress on OA action plans, and I'll be in touch with many of you one-on-one about how timeline and tools and resources for ongoing opportunities to present developed or being developed OA action plans, in development OA action plans. We are preparing, of course, for our Ocean Conference and COP24, so stay tuned with newsletters with more information about what the OA Alliance is planning to do there and how we will engage. And then lastly, we will have a 2018 progress report out for everyone's review coming out probably at the end of December. And we are currently working on the 2019 work plan and look forward to sharing that with you all. So without further ado, I will just say thank you very much for joining. Thank you for bearing with me during the Zoom meeting first trial run. I think it went okay. And thank you again for the presenters this evening and this morning, depending on where you're at. Really appreciate you contributing to this conversation, and know you've done this presentation in many forums, but it's just great to continue to share the message. So thank you, and wishing everyone a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.